The silence in this house used to be a comfort, a soft blanket after a long day. Now it's just a void, vast and echoing. It's been 6 months since Barbara left, but the quiet still hasn't settled right. It presses in, heavy with unspoken words, tinged with the sharp edge of betrayal. I sit here in the armchair she always claimed was hers, the floral one with the slightly worn arms, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun slanting through the window. Everything looks the same, yet nothing feels familiar. It wasn't a stranger. That's the part that twists deepest, the part that catches my breath even now. It was Frank. Frank Henderson from next door. The man I'd borrowed tools from, shared beers with over the fence, watched countless football games beside on his patio, while our wives chatted inside. Frank, whose lawnmower I'd fixed just last summer, whose kids played with ours when they were younger. The sheer proximity of it feels like a physical blow sometimes. Every morning I open the blinds, and there it is, his house, a constant, unavoidable reminder. The cheerful yellow door seems to mock me. I trace the rim of the mug. It's one of a pair Barbara bought on our anniversary trip to Vermont years ago. Hers had bluebirds, mine has cardinals. Hers is still in the cupboard. I haven't been able to bring myself to pack it away, along with the other ghosts scattered throughout these rooms. Each object whispers a memory, a shared laugh, a quiet moment that now feels like a lie. Was she thinking of him then, when we bought these mugs? When we planned that trip? The questions loop endlessly, a painful, unproductive churn in my mind. They say time heals, but right now, time feels less like a healer and more like an observer, watching patiently as I stumble through the wreckage. Grief is a strange landscape. Anger is a sudden storm, leaving a fragile sort of calm in its wake before the clouds gather again. But underneath it all is this profound sense of dislocation, like I've woken up in a life that's parallel to the one I knew, almost identical but fundamentally wrong. The man who lived here 6 months ago, the one who trusted implicitly, who believed in the solidity of his world, feels like a different person entirely. I'm still trying to figure out who this new man, the one sitting alone in his wife's armchair, is supposed to be. The discovery wasn't a dramatic confrontation, no shouting match in the street, or tearful confession late at night. It was quieter, almost mundane, which somehow made it worse. An email left open on the laptop we shared. Not steamy declarations, but logistical planning, times, places, coded references that were insultingly transparent once the veil of trust was ripped away. Frank's name, plain as day. Barbara's casual sign-off. It felt like reading stage directions for a play I never knew I was acting in. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. It wasn't disbelief, not exactly. It was more like my mind couldn't reconcile the image on the screen with the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought I had, the Barbara who tucked notes into my lunch bag, who planned elaborate scavenger hunts for our kids' birthdays, who held my hand tightly during my father's funeral. How did she coexist with the woman arranging clandestine meetings with the man next door? There's a specific memory that haunts me. Last year's neighborhood block party. We were all gathered in the cul-de-sac, kids running around with water guns, adults clustered around coolers and grills. I was manning the barbecue, flipping burgers, laughing with Frank about some local council decision. Barbara brought me a plate, leaning in to whisper something funny about Mrs. Henderson's questionable potato salad. She brushed my arm as she turned away, a casual gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. But now I replay it frame by frame. Was her smile for me, or was it a shared glance with Frank I hadn't intercepted? Was the brush of her arm a simple act of affection, or a subtle performance for an audience of one? My mind dissects every past interaction, searching for clues I missed, turning innocent moments into potential evidence of deceit. Seeing Frank now is an exercise in silent agony. We used to wave, chat about the weather, or whose turn it was to trim the hedge separating our properties. Now there's an awkward, heavy silence. If we're both outside, one of us inevitably finds a sudden, urgent reason to go back indoors. His car pulling into his driveway sends a jolt through me. Sometimes, through the kitchen window, I see his silhouette moving inside his house, and I feel a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He's still there, living his life just yards away, while mine feels like it's been hollowed out. He still talks to the other neighbors, joins the weekend yard work brigade. Does he feel any remorse? Does he ever look over here and think about the ruins? Or was it just convenient? That's another question that offers no peace. Our marriage wasn't perfect, of course. Whose is, after 20-odd years? We had our disagreements, patches, where communication felt like wading through mud. But I always believed we were fundamentally solid. I remember nights we'd sit out on the back porch swing after the kids were asleep, sharing a bottle of wine, talking about everything and nothing. The future, silly anxieties, memories from when we first met. There was an ease there, a comfortable rhythm built over decades, or so I thought. Now, I wonder what she was really thinking during those quiet moments. Was the silence companionable for her, or was it filled with thoughts of him? Did she look at me and see the comfortable predictability she wanted to escape? When she left, it was strangely anticlimactic. There was no shouting, no throwing of possessions. After I confronted her with the email, calmly, my voice sounding unnervingly distant even to myself, she didn't deny it. There were tears, yes, but they felt thin, obligatory. She spoke about feeling unseen, about a loneliness I hadn't recognized. Excuses that felt flimsy, rehearsed. She packed 2 suitcases that same evening. There was a chilling efficiency to her movements, like she was closing a chapter she'd already mentally finished long ago. She said she was going to stay with her sister, needed space. She didn't mention Frank, didn't offer details. The lack of a fight, the absence of any real attempt to explain or salvage things, hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. It felt like dismissal. Now, mundane tasks carry the weight of her absence and the reason for it. Making coffee involves reaching past her favorite mug. Sorting the mail means automatically looking for her name before remembering. Even grocery shopping is a minefield. Stumbling across the brand of yogurt she liked or the imported biscuit she bought for special occasions sends a pang through me. It's like navigating a familiar room in the dark. You know the layout, but you keep bumping into sharp corners of memory. I find myself oscillating between a dull ache and flashes of sharp anger. Sometimes I want to march over to Frank's yellow door and demand, what? An apology? An explanation? Would knowing the why even help? Or would it just provide more graphic images to fuel the sleepless nights? Part of me just wants to understand how two people who shared so much history, who built a life side by side with another family, could cross that line. Another part of me is just tired, worn down by the constant emotional static. Yesterday, I was taking out the recycling bins, and Frank pulled up in his truck. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the dew-wet lawns. There was no malice in his glance, just a kind of weary avoidance, a mirror of my own. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod and hurried inside. No words exchanged, none needed. The chasm between our houses feels wider than just a few yards of grass now. It feels miles deep, filled with the wreckage of broken trust and the ghosts of barbecues past. The simple act of mowing the lawn has become a strategic operation. I find myself checking Frank's driveway first, gauging whether he's likely to be outside. If his truck is gone, I feel a small measure of relief, a brief window where I can tend to my own patch of green without the heavy awareness of him nearby. If it's there, I hesitate. Sometimes I put it off, telling myself the grass can wait another day. Other times I push through, clenching my jaw, focusing intently on the straight lines I'm cutting, trying to ignore the periphery. It's ridiculous feeling like a trespasser on my own property, governed by the movements of the man who upended my life. The neighborhood dynamic has shifted, subtly but undeniably. People are still polite, of course. This is suburbia. Politeness is the default setting. But there's a different quality to the waves now, a slight hesitation in the smiles. Ada Miller from across the street, who always used to stop for a lengthy chat about her prize-winning roses, now offers a quicker greeting, her eyes flicking towards Frank's house for just a second too long before she moves on. Do they know? Of course they must. Whispers travel faster than lawnmowers in a place like this. I imagine the conversations behind closed doors, the speculation, the pity. That stings too, being seen as the wronged husband, the poor guy whose wife ran off with the neighbor. It reduces a complex, messy reality into a tidy, embarrassing narrative. I haven't talked much about it, not really. My sister calls regularly, her voice laced with concern I appreciate but can't fully absorb. My friends try, inviting me out for drinks or suggesting distractions. But explaining the depth of this specific hurt, the betrayal compounded by the everyday proximity, the ghosts in my own home, feels exhausting. How do you articulate the feeling of your sanctuary becoming a source of pain? How do you explain that the man you shared weekend chores with is the reason your wife's side of the bed is cold? Sometimes, sorting through old photo albums, I force myself to look at pictures from happier times, family vacations, holidays, birthday parties. There's one of Barbara and me, younger, beaming, standing arm in arm with Frank and his wife at some neighborhood gathering years ago. We all look so carefree, so oblivious. Seeing it now is like looking at a historical artifact from a civilization I no longer belong to. The trust, the easy camaraderie, it feels impossibly naive. Did the fault lines exist even then, hidden beneath the surface? Was I blind or just willfully ignorant? The anger comes less frequently now, replaced by a pervasive sadness, a sense of weariness. I'm tired of the mental replays, tired of scanning the past for warnings I missed, tired of feeling this low hum of anxiety whenever I hear a car door slam next door. I need to find a way forward, but the path is obscured by fog. Selling the house feels like admitting defeat, letting them drive me out. But staying here, surrounded by these constant reminders, is that living or just enduring? I turn the cold mug in my hands, the cardinals on the ceramic staring blankly back at me. The silence stretches on, broken only by the distant drone of someone else's lawnmower starting up down the street. I started going for long walks in the evenings, deliberately taking routes that led away from our street, exploring parts of town I hadn't paid much attention to before. There's an old park on the other side of the railway tracks, overgrown and quiet, with benches facing a slow-moving creek. Sitting there, listening to the water and the distant rumble of trains, offers a temporary respite. It's a place without memories of Barbara or Frank, a neutral ground where I can just breathe without the weight of the house pressing down on me. During one of these walks, I bumped into Tom Riley, an old colleague I hadn't seen in years. We stopped to chat, the conversation flowing easily from work updates to retirement plans. He asked about Barbara, casually, innocently. "How's Barbara doing? Still enjoying her gardening?" The question, so normal and well-intentioned, felt like a physical jab. I mumbled something vague about her being away, visiting family. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. It's the constant need for these small deceptions, these careful evasions, that chips away at me. It isolates me further, building walls when maybe I should be reaching out. But the shame of the situation, the sheer awkwardness of the neighbor detail, keeps me silent. My kids are grown now, thankfully spared the daily reality of this mess. My daughter, Audrey, lives 2 states away, absorbed in her career. My son is in his final year of university. They know, of course. Telling them was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Audrey was furious, protective, wanting to fly home immediately. My son was quieter, more withdrawn, the hurt visible in his eyes. They call, they worry, they offer support I'm grateful for, but there's a distance created by geography and, perhaps, by their own need to process this break in the foundation of their childhood. Their pain is another layer to this complex grief. How does this change their view of marriage, of trust? I worry about that too. Last week, I finally forced myself to start clearing out some of Barbara's things. Not the big stuff, just a few drawers in the bedroom closet. Each item felt loaded. A scarf I bought her in Italy, a collection of playbills from shows we'd seen, a faded photograph of us standing on a beach, wind-swept and smiling. I packed them into a box, the movement slow, methodical. It wasn't cathartic, not yet. It just felt necessary, like weeding a garden that's been neglected for too long. You have to pull out the dead things to make room for potential new growth, even if you have no idea what might grow there or if anything will grow at all. As I sealed the box, my gaze fell on the window overlooking Frank's backyard. He was out there, tossing a ball for his dog, oblivious. Or perhaps not. Perhaps he carries his own burdens, his own regrets. I wouldn't know. We inhabit separate planets now, orbiting the same sun, but never intersecting. The brief flicker of anger returned, sharp and hot, but it faded quickly, leaving behind the familiar residue of weariness. I left the box by the attic door. Another task paused halfway, unsure of the next step. This limbo, this state of suspended animation between the life I lost and a future I can't yet envision, is the hardest part. It's the not knowing how or when The quiet in this house will finally start to feel like peace again. A few days after packing that first box, I made a decision. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet resolve that settled over me as I sat drinking my morning coffee. I called a realtor. Ada Miller's recommendation, actually, not to sell, not yet, but to understand my options, to know the value, the process. Just having that conversation, taking a concrete step, felt like loosening a single knot in the tangled mess inside me. The realtor, a kind woman named Clara Chung with sympathetic eyes, was discreet and professional. She walked through the house, complimenting the features Barbara and I had painstakingly chosen years ago: the hardwood floors, the bay window in the dining room. Each compliment felt strangely bittersweet. This house held 20 years of my life, the good and the bad. Could I really walk away from it? But could I truly heal within these walls, with Frank's yellow door perpetually in my line of sight? Clara left me with brochures and figures, tangible things to consider, a small anchor in the sea of emotional uncertainty. Later that week, Audrey called. Her voice was tentative at first, checking in, asking how I was really doing. We talked for almost an hour. She didn't push, but she listened, truly listened, as I haltingly tried to explain the day-to-day reality, the awkward encounters, the ghosts in the rooms, the feeling of being adrift. "Dad," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to go through this alone. And you don't have to stay there, you know. It's okay to choose yourself." Her words, simple and direct, resonated more than any platitudes about time healing all wounds. Choose myself. It sounded foreign. For years, my choices had been interwoven with Barbara's, with the family unit. Untangling that, figuring out what I wanted, felt like learning a new language. Yesterday morning, I was pruning the rose bushes Barbara had planted along the fence line, the one bordering Frank's property. I was focused on untangling a thorny branch when I heard his back door open. I didn't look up immediately, just continued snipping, my muscles tense. I could feel his presence, hear the soft thud of his dog's paws on their deck. Then his voice, quiet and hesitant. "Morning." I froze for a second, shears hovering over a bloom. I could have ignored him, pretended I hadn't heard, but something made me turn slowly. I met his gaze. He looked older, lines etched deeper around his eyes. There was no arrogance there, no defiance, just a man standing on his deck looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Frank," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady, level. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it wasn't hate either. It was just acknowledgement. Two people sharing a small, uncomfortable space on the planet. He gave another curt nod, then turned and went back inside, his dog following him. The exchange lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt significant, like drawing a line, not in anger, but in acceptance of the new, fractured reality. I finished pruning the roses, the thorns occasionally pricking my fingers. Barbara loved these roses. Maybe I'd keep them, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd sell the house and plant new ones somewhere else entirely. The path forward was still foggy, but for the first time, sitting there on the porch swing later that evening, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight, I felt a flicker, not of hope exactly, but of possibility. The quiet didn't feel quite so heavy tonight. It felt open. That brief exchange with Frank, as small as it was, seemed to recalibrate something inside me. It didn't erase the hurt, but it lessened the constant grating tension I felt just existing near him. It was like turning down the volume on persistent static. The following Saturday, the neighborhood association put up flyers for the annual fall cleanup day at the park, the very park I'd adopted as my neutral territory. Normally, I'd find an excuse. The thought of forced small talk with neighbors, the potential for awkward encounters with Frank, who usually participated, the quiet pity I imagined seeing in people's eyes. It was all too much. But this time felt different. Audrey's words echoed, "Choose yourself." Staying hidden away in the house, avoiding my own community, wasn't choosing myself. It was letting the betrayal dictate the terms of my life. So I decided to go. Not with any great enthusiasm, but with a quiet determination. I put on my oldest jeans and a worn sweatshirt, grabbed my gardening gloves, and walked down the street towards the park entrance. Several neighbors were already there, armed with rakes and trash bags. Ada Miller waved enthusiastically, calling out, "Glad you could make it." Her smile seemed genuine this time, less strained. Tom Riley was there too, wrestling with a tangled pile of branches. We exchanged nods, and yes, Frank was there, over by the creek bank, methodically clearing debris. We didn't interact beyond a brief mutual glance as I joined a group collecting fallen leaves near the playground. I focused on the task, the rhythmic scrape of the rake against the damp earth, surprisingly grounding. Working alongside people, even with the underlying awkwardness, felt better than stewing alone in the house. There were moments of easy chatter about overgrown bushes and the upcoming town council meeting. No one mentioned Barbara. No one gave me pitying looks. Maybe I had been projecting some of that myself. Or maybe enough time had passed that the initial shockwave had dissipated, leaving just the quiet acknowledgement of a changed landscape. At one point, Frank and I ended up working near each other, clearing leaves from around the base of an old oak tree. There was a shared task, a common goal, however small. He handed me an empty trash bag without comment. I held it open while he raked a large pile into it. "Thanks," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Yep," I replied, equally terse. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't unbearable either. It was just functional. 2 men clearing leaves. When the cleanup finished a couple of hours later, someone had brought coffee and donuts. I hesitated for a moment, then joined the small knot of people gathered near the picnic tables. I kept my distance from Frank, who stood talking quietly with another neighbor. But I didn't bolt for home either. I had a donut, drank a cup of surprisingly decent coffee, and even managed a short, normal conversation with Ada about her plans for winterizing her roses. Walking home later, the air crisp, the scent of burning leaves somewhere in the distance, I felt a profound sense of quiet accomplishment. It wasn't a victory, not a grand gesture. It was just showing up, choosing to participate in my own life, in my own neighborhood, despite the discomfort, reclaiming a small piece of normalcy. As I turned onto my street, Frank's yellow door didn't seem quite so menacing. It was just a door. The power it held over me was diminishing slowly, one rake stroke, one brief acknowledgement, one conscious choice at a time. The house felt a little less like a cage when I walked back inside. The feeling of reclaiming small territories continued in subtle ways. One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing in the spare room downstairs, the one Barbara had used as a crafting space, filled with bins of fabric scraps, yarn, and half-finished projects I never quite understood. It had remained untouched since she left, a monument to her abandoned hobbies. On impulse, I started clearing it out, not angrily, just methodically. I packed her supplies neatly into boxes, labeling them with her sister's address. Maybe she'd want them someday. Maybe not. It didn't really matter. What mattered was the act of clearing the space. As I worked, sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes. An idea sparked. This room got the best afternoon light. It would make a good study, a place for my books, maybe even that old drafting table I had stored in the attic. The thought of creating something new in that space, something solely for me, felt surprisingly good. It wasn't about erasing her, but about overlaying the present onto the past, writing my own next chapter within these same walls. Clara Chung called a few days later, a polite follow-up. "Just checking in," she said. "Any thoughts on listing?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out at my backyard, the freshly pruned roses standing neat against the fence. "Not yet, Clara," I told her, hearing the firmness in my own voice. I think I need a little more time living here first." It felt true. The idea of leaving wasn't completely off the table, but it no longer felt like an urgent escape route. Maybe staying wasn't defeat after all. Maybe it was resilience. I still think about Barbara, of course, sometimes with a pang of sadness for the good years, sometimes with a residual bitterness. I haven't heard from her directly since she left, only logistical emails forwarded through her sister regarding finances or things she wanted retrieving. Forgiveness feels like a distant country I'm not sure I have a visa for, but the consuming anger, the obsessive need to understand why, has faded. It's been replaced by a quieter acceptance that some things remain unknowable. Some wounds leave permanent scars. The scar tissue is thick, less raw now. It doesn't define me, but it's part of the landscape. Yesterday, I saw Frank washing his truck in his driveway. Our eyes met briefly. Another curt nod was exchanged. No tension, no awkward scramble to look away. Just two neighbors existing in proximity. Later, I started sketching out plans for the new study, imagining bookshelves filled, the drafting table positioned by the window. The house felt quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, less like an echoing void, more like a space waiting to be filled. The path forward still wasn't brightly lit, but I could see a few steps ahead, and for now, that felt like enough. Winter arrived, dusting the neighborhood in a layer of clean white snow. The yellow door next door seemed less jarring against the muted landscape. Frank's truck sat covered in a thick blanket. We were all somewhat housebound by the weather, the enforced separation providing a different kind of quiet. I spent those colder months working steadily on the spare room, transforming it into my study. Sanding the floors, painting the walls a warm, neutral color, assembling bookshelves. The physical labor was grounding, the progress visible. Each completed task felt like a small victory against the inertia that had held me for so long. Audrey came home for the holidays. Walking into the nearly finished study, her eyes lit up. "Dad, this looks amazing. It feels like you," she said, running a hand over the smooth wood of a bookshelf I'd built. Seeing her approval, the genuine warmth in her expression meant more than I could say. We spent quiet evenings talking, watching old movies, rebuilding our connection in the changed landscape of our family. She didn't ask about Barbara or Frank, and I didn't offer. We focused on the present, on us. One afternoon, shoveling the walkway after a heavy snowfall, I saw Frank struggling with his snowblower down the street. It sputtered and died. He kicked the tire lightly in frustration. The old me, the pre-discovery me, would have walked over without a second thought, offered help, maybe tinkered with the engine. That instinct was still there, buried deep, a relic of neighborly habit. But I hesitated. Helping him felt complicated. Too much history, too much unsaid. Instead, I just continued shoveling my own path, clearing the way to my own door. It wasn't unkindness, I told myself. It was boundaries. It was choosing myself, just like Audrey said. He eventually got it started again, the roar echoing in the cold air. We didn't acknowledge each other. The study is finished now. My books line the shelves. The drafting table sits by the window, overlooking the snowy backyard. Sometimes I sit in there, reading or just looking out, feeling a sense of ownership, of peace that has been absent for a long time. The silence in the house is finally losing its sharp edges. It's becoming just quiet again. The ghosts haven't entirely vanished, but they whisper now instead of shouting. The scar remains, a permanent reminder of the break, but it no longer dictates my every move. Life cracked, yes, but maybe, slowly, I'm learning how to live within those cracks, finding strength not in forgetting, but in carrying on despite it. The future isn't clear, but the fog is lifting, revealing possibilities I couldn't see before. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. Spring is starting to hint at its return. The dirty snow recedes, revealing the determined green shoots of crocuses pushing through the thawing earth along the walkway. From my study window, I watch a cardinal, bright red against the gray branches, just like the one on my old Vermont mug, land briefly before flying off towards the park. There's a quiet resilience in that simple act, in the turning of seasons that resonates more deeply now. Life continues, shifts, adapts. The hurt hasn't vanished, erased by time or effort, but it no longer commands the silence in this house. It's become a part of the history etched into these walls, a chapter in a longer story, not the defining narrative it once threatened to be. What comes next remains unwritten, pages waiting to be turned. But the pen feels lighter in my hand, the path forward less obscured, and the quiet finally holds the simple, unburdened promise of peace.